What's up, guys? Welcome back. Cool. So, wow, be honest, I missed, I think, 3 days because I just choked, but we went to St. George, had a great time down there, and so I was more focused on that, not on this podcast, which I should have been doing every day, but I guess I just chose not to. But here we are, back at it. So with last episode with Cody, we kind of went over the 7 habits, an overview, and habits defined. How essentially, it takes a lot of effort, more than people realize, to break a habit and to establish new habits. And the habits are defined as the knowledge, the skill, and desire to do something. And the object and design of our existence. Happiness is the object and design of our existence, and in part at least as the fruit of the desire and ability to sacrifice what we want now for what we want eventually. So happiness, which is the object and design of our existence, can be defined as the ability to sacrifice what we want now for what we want eventually. So sacrifice short-term pleasure for long-term joy, essentially what that's saying. So moving on from that, we're going into what's called the Maturity Continuum. I'm actually really excited for this because it is the growth from dependence to independence to interdependence. This is a journey that I have loved going on because it's brought me a lot of inner security, a lot of inner guidance, wisdom, a lot of power, and just a lot of confidence in my life and who I am and where I'm going with my life and all these things. So we're going to get right into it. Here we go. The Maturity Continuum. The 7 habits are not a separate The 7 habits are not a set of separate or piecemeal psych-up formulas. In harmony with the natural laws of growth, they provide an incremental, sequential, highly integrated approach to the development of personal and interpersonal effectiveness. They move us progressively on a maturity continuum from dependence to independence to interdependence. Okay, that's really cool though, that the 7 habits, they're not these separate entities that work individually or apart from the others to increase effectiveness in our lives, but rather they're one whole. So it is the relationship between the 7 habits that make them so powerful. They have themselves are amazing pillars to structure your life off of, but the relationship between them and the order and the sequential of that order is something that is also very magnificent and is very noteworthy. He continues on saying, "We each begin life as an infant, totally dependent on others. We are directed, nurtured, and sustained by others. Without this nurturing, we would only live for a few hours or a few days at the most." So we start off as babies as being very dependent, especially as mammals. We are very dependent upon our parents at the moment of birth. Then gradually, over the ensuing months and years, we become more and more independent, physically, mentally, emotionally, and financially, until eventually we can essentially take care of ourselves, becoming inner-directed and self-reliant. So this reminds me of our teenage years, or even going into college, right? When you become really independent, especially if you go to college out of state, when you're really not at all close to your parents at all. It says here, as we continue to grow and mature, we become increasingly aware that all of nature is interdependent, that there is an ecological system that governs nature, including society. We further discover that the higher reaches of our nature have to do with our relationships with others, that human life also is interdependent. So I'm not an ecologist or even a biologist or whatever it is, study ecological systems. So I'd be very interested to go into that and study why it's so interdependent. I've studied the mutual benefit, whatever that term that's called, but where like two animals will benefit from each other, which is synergy. Symbiote, I can't remember. Anyways, that would be cool to go further into. And it's saying that human life is also an interdependent world. Our growth from infancy to adulthood is in accordance with natural law, and there are many dimensions to growth. Okay. Reaching our full physical maturity, for example, does not necessarily assure us of simultaneous emotional or mental maturity. On the other hand, a person's physical dependence does not mean that he or she is mentally or emotionally immature. So it's saying that growing from infanthood to adulthood is according to natural law. Like, it will happen whether you want to or not. But there are many dimensions to that growth. So we can grow physically, but not necessarily emotionally or intellectually. But we can grow in those areas, but not necessarily like physically. So it says here, on the maturity continuum, the dependence is the paradigm of you. You take care of me. You come through for me. You didn't come through. I blame you for the results. Independence is a paradigm of I. I can do it. I am responsible. I am self-reliant. I can choose. Interdependence is the paradigm of we. We can do it. We can cooperate. We can combine our talents and abilities and create something greater together. Dependent people need others to get what they want. Independent people can get what they want through their own effort. Interdependent people combine their own efforts with the efforts of others to achieve their greatest success. Okay, so just kind of breaking that down. Maturity continuum. Dependence to independence to interdependence. Dependence is this whole idea, this whole paradigm of like, it's your fault. You're to blame for my mistakes. It is like, it's your weaknesses that make my life terrible, or it's your strengths that make my life so good. Like, you're the person who is taking care of me. You make my life amazing, or worse. So that could either be like very like, how I'm doing it is that could be very enemy centered, or it could be very like friend centered or even spouse centered. Independence is a paradigm of like I. So I can do it. I am responsible. I am self-reliant. I can choose. And so I'm viewing that as more like almost self-centered, but more so, and we'll go into centered later. Sorry, I'm jumping the gun here. Habit 2 talks about that. But like, I am able to, like, it's all about me. Like, I can do everything. I take all the credit. You can only get so much done by yourself. And that's why interdependence is so amazing, because it's this paradigm of like, we, like, as a culture, as a group, as a team, we can do it. We can cooperate. Actually, cool insight there with the word cooperate, co-operate. So you're operating together as a team. We can combine our talents and abilities to create something greater together. So it's like this whole idea of like bringing two elements together in order to create something better and like more perfect, more holy. So this reminds me of like, yeah, like marriage. That's a great example. But I guess marriage in a we paradigm, like you both deliver value to the relationship and that you're not dependent. Because there's a difference between interdependence and codependence. And so let me see if I can explain that correctly. Interdependence is a positive reinforcement of each other's value and worth and affirmations, whereas codependence is essentially like you blame the other person for your circumstances, and both people are doing that. And so it's this negative downward spiral that occurs. And so they may be locked within the bonds of matrimony and like live together, and like cultural norms say that they should like love each other, and they try, but because they don't take responsibility for their own lives, because they don't say like, I am who I am because of the choices that I have made, that person can never become interdependent. And so they start blaming their life and their situations and circumstances and like emotional levels and feelings on the other person. And when both people do that, it creates this downward spiral where one person will blame the other for weaknesses, and then that person will justify that weakness by how the other person reacts. And then it's just this vice versa thing that just keeps going down, down, down. Whereas interdependency is the opposite of that, to where the strengths will compensate for the weaknesses of the other person. And where one person falls, the other person will catch that, and then vice versa. And it creates this super like powerful, energetic, like celebratory way of life, and how you can really impact and increase the meaning and joy in your own life through these interdependent relationships. Says here, dependent people need others to get what they want. Independent people can get what they want through their own effort. Interdependent people combine their own efforts with the efforts of others to achieve their greatest success. So interdependent people view other people as like resources, as like team members to be able to achieve more than they could all alone or by themselves. He goes on and says, if I were physically dependent, paralyzed or disabled, or limited in some physical way, I would need you to help me. If I were emotionally dependent, my sense of worth and security would come from your opinion of me. If you didn't like me, it could be devastating. If I were intellectually dependent, I would count on you to do my thinking for me, to think through the issues and problems of my life. So essentially, physically dependent is like literally you can't walk or move, and that happens to some people, and that's unfortunate. But like, not much you can do about that if you're paralyzed. But it still is dependency, because you wouldn't be able to live without someone taking care of you. And it says here, if you were emotionally dependent, then, or if I were emotionally dependent, my sense of worth and security would come from like your opinion of me. So I'm going to like love myself and view myself in this light that you control. And that's going to create a lot of anxiety and stress and nerves and like forced pressure, because essentially I have to be perfect in order to make sure that you like me, because if you don't like me, then game over. Like I'm depressed. If I were intellectually, it says here, if you didn't like me, it could be devastating. Yeah. If I were intellectually dependent, I would count on you to do my thinking for me. So it's essentially, if you were intellectually dependent, you would have someone else think through all your problems and your issues and concerns, and you wouldn't actually do any of that yourself. If I were independent physically, I could pretty well make it on my own. You're strong enough, you can carry stuff, you can make it physically. Mentally, I could think of my own thoughts. I could move from one level of abstraction to another. I could think creatively and analytically and organize and express my thoughts in understandable ways. Essentially, if you're independent, you have a good brain, you can think, you can express your own opinions, analyze things, organize it, create an argument, that kind of stuff. Emotionally, I would be validated. Emotionally, I would be validated from within. I would be inner directed. My sense of worth would not be a function of being liked or treated well. So essentially, you would view yourself as your own fountain of security and worth. So independent of what other people do, hence independence, you yourself know who you are and know your worth and know your value. And so what other people think of you isn't going to change that whatsoever. My sense of worth would not be a function of being liked or treated well. It's easy to see that independence is much more mature than dependence. Independence is a major achievement in and of itself, but independence is not supreme. Nevertheless, the current social paradigm enthrones independence. It is the avowed goal of many individuals and social movements. Most of the self-improvement material puts independence on a pedestal, as though communication, teamwork, and cooperation were lesser values. So society and culture has, especially in America, in Eastern countries, I know that's like not the case at all. Eastern countries in like Asia, Taiwan, Australia, even some countries in Europe, they very much put a high emphasis on like unity and community and like organization and family and like team members. In America, a lot of it is about independence, though, becoming your own person, finding out who you are, making sure that you're the best version of yourself, which is good. It's better than being dependent, physically, intellectually, or emotionally. But he says that's not the supreme way of living. So he's saying that the culture puts communication, teamwork, and cooperation as lesser values. But are they actually? That's the question. So says here, but much of our current emphasis on independence is a reaction to dependence, to having others control us, define us, use us, and manipulate us. That's interesting. Let me dive more into this. But much of our current emphasis on independence is a reaction to dependence, to having others control us, define us, use us, and manipulate us. Okay. Interesting. I'm actually not sure what that means. I think it means like we put so much emphasis on independence because there is so much dependence. And so it's like, because we don't like dependence, we try to make it to independence. And it just seems like it's the opposite of it, like the natural way. Whereas like, that's interesting. I'm not actually sure what that means. Going on, the little understood concept of interdependence appears The little understood concept of interdependence appears to many to smack of dependence, and therefore we find people, often for selfish reasons, leaving their marriages, abandoning their children, and forsaking all kinds of social responsibility, all in the name of independence. So he's saying that a lot of times we take this interpretation of dependence and smack it onto interdependence. And that's why so many people leave, because they're going for independence. I mean, because independence is being emphasized, we don't take our interdependent relationships seriously because we view them as dependent. And so we naturally will veer to a more independent role, leaving our social responsibilities. Not saying that happens always, but that some people do it. Just being aware that it is something that happens. The kind of reaction that results in people throwing off their shackles, becoming liberated, asserting themselves, and doing their own thing often reveals more fundamental dependencies that cannot be run away from because they are internal rather than external. Dependencies such as letting the weaknesses of other people ruin our emotional lives or feeling victimized by people and events are out of our control. Of course, we may need to change our circumstances, but the dependence problem is a personal maturity issue that has little to do with circumstances. Even with better circumstances, immaturity and dependence often persist. That's interesting. When people say, like, if only I had this, or if only I could be like this, or have this job, or this much money, it's like, well, yeah, like, your circumstances might change, but your dependent nature will still persist. It still will. And so those same problems are still going to happen, even if you had those things. Like, that's not actually the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that you're a dependent person, whether that be intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, physically, like whatever it is. Your circumstances aren't really going to change. You still are a dependent person, feeling victimized and out of control. It says here, true independence of character empowers us to act rather than to be acted upon. It frees us from our dependence on circumstances and other people and is a worthy, liberating goal. But it is not the ultimate goal in effective living. So again, independence is better than dependence, and it is a worthy, liberating goal. It's a worthwhile thing to go after. but it's not the final step. It's not as either or, but there's either 3 steps. It says here, independent thinking alone is not suited to interdependent reality. Independent people who do not have the maturity to think and act interdependently may be good individual producers, but they won't be good leaders or team players. They're not coming from the paradigm of interdependence necessary to succeed in marriage, family, and or organizational reality. So essentially, independent people will do really, really well by themselves. And individually, they're going to produce a lot. But they don't have the capacity to become good leaders, good team players, good spouses, good organizational assets. That's cool. Life is, by nature, highly interdependent. To try to achieve maximum effectiveness through independence is like trying to play tennis with a golf club. The tool is not suited to the reality. So we can go through life being independent, but if you look at the natural laws of not only the world, but also we as humans, we derive most of our joy and happiness and meaning from the relationships we have with other people. And so although independence is a worthy goal and it is good to meet that, it does not encompass the full meaning and joy of our lives. We need to learn to move to interdependence. Because that's a really cool analogy. The tennis with the golf club. Sorry, these messages are popping up everywhere. Do not disturb. Cool. So, continuing on, he says, interdependence is a far more mature, more advanced concept. If I am physically interdependent, I am self-reliant and capable. But I also realize that you and I working together can accomplish far more than even at my best I could accomplish alone. If I am emotionally interdependent, I derive a great sense of worth within myself. But I also recognize the need for love, for giving, and for receiving love from others. If I am intellectually interdependent, I realize that I need the best thinking of other people to join with my own. So essentially, like, if I understand this correctly, an interdependent person is independent in the fact that they will derive a great sense of worth from within. That doesn't matter what anybody does, they're going to love themselves for who they are. And that no other person can change that. But in addition to that, they also will recognize that there's this need for love, for sacrifice, for serving, for giving, and for receiving love from others. And so there's this higher form of living. And if you're intellectually interdependent, you realize that your ideas, although they may be great, will be enhanced by the ideas and thinking processes of other people. As an interdependent person, I have the opportunity to share myself deeply and meaningfully with others, and I have access to the vast resources and potential of other human beings. That's pretty cool, actually. So essentially, you're saying that as an interdependent person, I can share myself deeply with others and have access to other deep resources and potential. So human beings are an asset, not a liability, which financial accountants say otherwise, but we can get into that to a different topic. Interdependence is a choice only independent people can make. Dependent people cannot choose to become interdependent. They don't have the character to do it. They don't own enough of themselves. That's a really cool concept. They don't own enough of themselves. They don't take responsibility for their lives. They essentially give power as they blame. They give power to external factors, people, circumstances, ideas, organizations, businesses, emotions, whatever. And because they don't take responsibility for their lives and give away that power, they don't own enough of themselves to choose to become interdependent. They're always going to fall into this codependency. They don't have the character to do it. It says here, that's why habits 1, 2, and 3 in the following chapters deal with self-mastery. They move a person from dependence to independence. They are the private victories. The essence of character growth. Private victories precede public victories. You can't invert that process any more than you can harvest a crop before you plant it. It's inside out. So he's saying that habits 1, 2, and 3 deal with private victories, with self-mastery, with becoming independent. And that's like a natural law. You can't skip that. It's a checkpoint you have to pass through. You can try, but you're just going to break yourself against that principle and end up falling into a fallen state. Going on, he says, as you become truly independent, you have the foundation for effective interdependence. You have the character base from which you can effectively work on the more personality-oriented public victories of teamwork, cooperation, and communication in habits 4, 5, and 6. So habits 1, 2, and 3 are the foundation of independence, which is the foundation for interdependence of public victories of habits 4, 5, and 6 of teamwork, cooperation, and communication. It says here, that does not mean you have to be perfect in habits 1, 2, and 3 before working on habits 4, 5, and 6. Understanding the sequence will help you manage your growth more effectively, but I'm not suggesting that you put yourself in isolation for several years until you fully develop habits 2, 1, 2, and 3. That's funny. It's like going up to a mountain and mastering those 3 before you do anything else. So he's saying essentially like, you don't have to have a perfect understanding of habits 1, 2, and 3 before you progress to habits 4, 5, and 6. But you should be aware of the order and at least understand that and put a bit more emphasis on habits 1, 2, and 3 as you begin this process. As part of an interdependent world, you have to relate to that world every day. But the acute problems of that world can easily obscure the chronic character causes. So as a person in an interdependent world, we have to relate to that world every day as we live in it. But he's saying that the problems of that world will easily surface our underlying character flaws and causes. Understanding how what you are impacts every Understanding how what you are impacts every interdependent interaction. What's that? Wait, what the heck? Understanding how what you are. Okay. All right, hang on. Sorry, guys. This is confusing. Understanding how what you are impacts every interdependent relationships will help you to focus your efforts sequentially in harmony with the natural laws of growth. So when you realize that who you are and like what you are, that impacts every interdependent interaction, that's going to help you harmonize yourself with natural laws of growth. So essentially, realizing what you are and who you are affects interdependent reactions, and that will help you harmonize yourself with better principles. So it says here, the diagram on the preceding page is a visual representation of the sequence and the interdependence of the 7 habits and will be used throughout this book as we explore both the sequential relationship between the habits and also their synergy. How in relating to each other, they create bold new forms of each other that add even more to their value. Each concept or habit will be highlighted and as it is introduced. So it's called the Maturity Continuum. You can look it up online. It's a circle with lots of triangles and lines. Pretty cool, actually. But essentially, it's just showing the progression, the journey between the habits and the relationships between the habits and where they are in that order and how it all works and flows together. Really cool. I highly recommend you guys go look that up. That was really cool for me. It's important for people to understand this because as you go from dependence to independence to interdependence, you are really able to get inner security, inner guidance, confidence, but also combine your powers with other people and create a massive amount of success. And if you're able to do that, it will create lots of meaning and joy in your life. But if you get caught up in this codependent downward spiral where 2 dependent people get together, it just doesn't work. It's just going to be a world of victimization and blame and self-justification. But anyway, guys, we're running out of time right now. But thank you very much for hopping on this, and I love you guys. And enjoy your night. Appreciate it.